Welcome, everyone. As mentioned earlier in the chat pod, you will be able to find the webinar materials, including a PDF of today's slides on the event page under Event Materials. It's the top of the hour, and I hope you're excited to jump in. My name is Kim Smith, and I am a program coordinator for OneOp. I will be moderating, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's session, Military Spouse Employment, Empowering and Inspiring Self-Advocacy. In case you're joining us for the first time, I'd like to give you a brief tour of our webinar platform so you can find your way around. Hopefully, you are currently able to view the slides we're sharing. If you are unable to see them or have any other difficulties, please email us at contact@oneop.org for tech support. Throughout today's webinar, we will be inviting you to join us in the chat. To embed the chat pod so you don't miss any links or conversation, simply place your cursor over the shared slides. You will then see a toolbar pop up across the bottom of your screen. From there, just click the chat bubble icon. When typing questions or comments, please be sure to select everyone from the options drop-down menu so everyone is able to view them in the chat pod. Please feel free to type your questions throughout today's presentation in the chat pod. We will also have a few minutes at the end of the presentation to answer questions as well. Please note that the slides and resources are available for download on the event page for today's session. We will be covering continuing education information at the end of the webinar, so please stay tuned toward the end if you're interested in continuing education credits or a certificate of attendance. If you need to step away at any time, the webinar recording will be available on the event page within 48 hours. Finally, closed captioning is available for this webinar. The subtitles can be turned on using the Zoom toolbar. Thank you for joining us as we continue our partnership with the Defense Department and the U.S. Department of Agriculture to expand the readiness, knowledge, and networks of the professionals supporting our military service members and their families. The views expressed in this presentation do not necessarily reflect the official policy of the Defense Department, USDA, U.S. government, or OneOp. The mention of any entity or product is for informational purposes only. As providers working with our military families, we hope that today you will gain a comprehensive understanding of the current landscape of military spouse employment, explore the human resources function, and acquire tips for successfully navigating it as both an applicant and an employee. Utilize practical skills to effectively communicate with and educate employers about the challenges and opportunities related to military spouse employment. And finally, to find inspiration to continue advocating for the personal and societal importance of expanding career opportunities for military spouses across all branches of service. It is my privilege to introduce Alice Reithman as our guest speaker today. Alice is an experienced employment attorney, human resource professional, and former employment litigator based in Spokane, Washington. She partners with employers to provide essential workforce training, consulting, and compliance assistance to address critical workforce challenges. She has built a dedicated employer counseling practice in Albuquerque, New Mexico, focusing on workplace compliance and enhancing employer-employee relationships. She is a longtime volunteer leader with the Society for Human Resource Management. Alice is a passionate advocate for military spouse employment and licensure, being the spouse of an active duty Air Force pilot herself. She serves as a U.S. Air Force Key Support Liaison Mentor and is a vocal champion for military spouse workforce initiatives. Alice has delivered over 125 hours of local and national speaking engagements on employment law and legislative matters, and has published multiple resources to help employers understand the benefits of hiring military spouses. Thank you so much for joining us, Alice, and I will now turn it over to you to begin our presentation.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Kim, for the kind introduction, and thank you to OneOp for the opportunity to join you all today to talk about something so near and dear to my heart and something that I think is such an incredibly important part of what OneOp does. And so I'm so grateful to OneOp for this opportunity and for taking up this important subject. So thank you again for the kind introduction. One quick housekeeping item before we dive into the slides is I do want to let you all know, please feel free to type questions into the chat pod as we go. Please do be sure you're selecting to send it to everyone. So please feel free. It helps if we ask questions as we go. Please know I will answer them in context if I know that I can do it fairly quickly. And or I don't know that or I know I'm not going to cover it later. If it is something that'll be covered later, please know I see it, but I'll hold off until I know I'm going to cover it. Otherwise, we will have time reserved at the end for questions. So please feel free to ask during, and we can save it if we need to or afterwards. Okay, with that, let's jump in. So Kim so kindly introduced me, and now I would really love the opportunity to know who is joining us today on, unfortunately, those who are joining us on YouTube, I can't see the chat, but for those of you who are here on Zoom with us, please drop in the chat your job title and where you're located. I've seen some people saying good morning from their locations, so it's wonderful to see that. So if you would take a moment and enter what your job title is so that I know who I'm speaking with this morning specifically and where in the United States or the world you are. Wonderful. Colorado Springs, New Jersey. We're getting all the time zones. North Carolina, wonderful. Community communication specialist, wonderful. San Diego. Oh, I envy your weather. Pensacola, Florida, beautiful. Military and family life counselor. Fort Worth, Texas. Wonderful. Thank you all so much. Turkey, wonderful. My mother was born on a military installation in Turkey. It is so wonderful to see all you here this morning. Wonderful. Some Florida, Las Vegas. Oh my goodness, I love how many different people we have from all over the place. This is fantastic. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning. Thank you for letting us know where you are and what your job function is. And thank you for advocating for military spouses in employment. So I'm going to jump in now and we're going to run through the agenda just very quickly. So I'm going to start with kind of a by the numbers, just what are we talking about with the issue of military spouse employment? What is the real issue? How big is it? Most of these statistics you will have seen before, talked about before, but I think they bear repeating. And for anyone who hasn't seen them before, I really want there to be that opportunity. Then we're going to jump into a little bit of behind the scenes of what the HR function looks like. So kind of what people are facing from an HR perspective, what the HR person is looking at when they see a resume, a cover letter. We'll just do a little bit of behind the scenes there that I think is helpful for you all to pass along to the military spouses you work with. And then we'll talk about really kind of the meat of it will be some practical tools where we're really going to go through tools that you can pass along to the military spouses with whom you work to help navigate the hiring process and the employment process. And then last but not least, we're going to touch a little bit on licensure because it is such a big deal for so many military spouses, the idea of transitioning and transferring licensure during PCS. So, okay, just a quick, this is a great graph, just because I will say when I started my passion project and really trying to understand the military spouse employment scenario, I didn't know how many people we were talking about, just honestly, how many civilian military spouses are associated with active duty military service members. And so the last good statistics we have on this come from 2022. And though what we were looking at that point, and it's probably pretty close to the same, is roughly 579,000 civilian spouses of military members. These numbers specifically include dual military families. So this is just how many civilian spouses of active duty military members. And it's also just helpful. You can kind of look and see how many per branch, how many spouses are associated with each of the branches. So looking at that and then placing it into context, the number that we continue to hear and see is that military spouses report an unemployment rate, active duty military spouses report an unemployment rate of right about 21%. And this has stayed fairly stable for a while. there is incredible efforts being made, and hopefully we will see this needle move. And right now, where we are is 21%. If we look at that as a 21% of the number we saw on the last screen, the 579,000, what we're looking at is roughly 121,000 unemployed spouses. And I do want to point out that this does not capture those who have opted out of the workforce. Please know this is not a fault of methodology with regard to the way that the 21% was obtained. It is the way that unemployment numbers are obtained. The question is, of those actively seeking employment, how many couldn't find it? So I know for me at least, I have encountered many military spouses who have opted out and have simply said, and I know the literature generally supports that there are many military spouses who aren't captured in the 21% because they've simply opted out. They've said it's too difficult, they can't find work, it's too frustrating. So I'm curious, we're going to use our poll function here, and I would love to know, for those of you in attendance, how many of you have encountered military spouses who simply withdrawn from the workforce due to ongoing challenges of finding work? So if you see the chat pod or the poll pop up, please just give us a yes or no. Yes, I've encountered spouses who have withdrawn from the workforce, or no, I really think that, most everybody who wants it is continuing to work. Great, we'll give one more minute or one more second. We'll do a whole minute. Um, okay, Kathleen, can you publish our results? Thank you so much. Okay, so what we have is about 85% of our attendees say yes, they have encountered spouses who have opted out, and about 15% who have said no, they have not encountered that. Thank you all for participating and weighing in. So it's just to know that what we are seeing is the best available data we have. Also, to put that 21% into perspective, what we also want to keep in mind is that the national average unemployment rate is 4%. So we are looking at military spouses as of, what the data is right now, being unemployed at a rate about 5 times higher than the national unemployment rate. So clearly there's something here that is worth looking at. And 19 weeks is the average number of weeks spent looking for employment. So when we see that a spouse has been out of work, generally what we see is that it takes them about 19 weeks to find employment. When you think about that in terms of 19 weeks of groceries and bills, and obviously that adds up very quickly. One of the other statistics that we learned through a really good, and if you've never looked at it, we'll reference it at the end, is the 2021 survey of active duty spouses. Is if you've never passed your eyes over it, it is so helpful to understand what spouses are saying, what they're experiencing. It's just a wealth of information about the entire military spouse experience, I think. But one of the things that came out of that survey is that spouses reported that the 12 months um, following PCS significantly increased the odds of unemployment. So we see that that's where the vulnerable point is. That's where spouses really tend to fall out of employment, which logically makes sense, is following PCS. So maybe when we're looking at ways to help target and find military spouses who may be experiencing this, is to recognize that those times right around PCS are particularly vulnerable. Some other things to note for those military spouses who are employed, only 62% are employed within their area of education and training. So this means that we have a large, I mean, thankfully, most, the more than 50% are working in their area of education and training. But if we look at the flip side, it means that we're looking at what 38% of spouses are working outside of their area of education or training. So this is something where then people are most likely earning less, not progressing in the area of their education or training. And it's also something that has a morale impact where it's so hard when people have studied and they've worked and they've gained all of this understanding about an area and then aren't able to apply it, to find work to apply it. One of the statistics that has always struck me the most, amongst all of these is that military spouses earn an average of 38% less than their peers who are married to civilians. So we are seeing that there is an appreciable difference in income levels for people doing the same or comparable jobs. And we'll talk about this more as we go, but 34% of military spouses work in occupations that require licensure, which does mean that then every move, generally when we're moving across state lines, is going to require a relicensure process, which is both time and money. We'll talk about those things in a minute, but just understanding that when we talk about licensure, we are truly talking about what is estimated to be 1/3 of military spouses that are being impacted by licensure issues, and that are being benefited by all of the licensure programs being negotiated. Okay, a couple more numbers, and then I promise I won't just do statistics. In 2018, the USDA did some research around food scarcity for active duty service members. And what they found is that 15.4% of active duty personnel were considered as having low food security, and another 10.4% were considered to have very low food security. 1 in 4 active duty spouses reports experiencing low or very low food security, which has been linked to unemployment and underemployment. Underemployment is much harder to capture. We have good data regarding unemployment. Underemployment is where somebody is not employed up to their skill set, not employed up to the number of hours that they really want to work. We don't have solid research on how many that is, but we know anecdotally that that is a concern. So food scarcity, just putting enough food on the table is one of the real, very tangible impacts of this challenge surrounding employment. And additionally, there's the loss of self-sufficiency. Should a military spouse have to be able to stand on their own due to divorce or the need to caregive for the active duty service member, or forbid that they're a survivor, and that they need to then pick up and care for their children on their own, the loss of the job history and the ability to have that solid career underneath them is truly a loss of self-sufficiency. And then additionally, for those of us on the call who are people who do work that we love, that we're passionate about, there is also an element of personal attainment and identity that spouses lose when they can't find work that they're passionate about, or even just find work, but especially if they're having to work outside of their education or training. And then lastly, I wanted to touch on just the impact on force readiness. And what we saw, there was an executive order issued by the last administration that essentially talked about the crisis of military spouse employment, and pointed out that nearly 1 in 5 military families cite challenges with spousal employment as a reason when they are considering leaving active duty service. This matters when we put it also into perspective and how few people can or will serve. In 2020, only 23% of Americans age 17 to 24 even qualify for military service. And of those, less than 0.5% of the US population serves. So the people who are willing to serve, we want to make sure that we are not losing that force readiness because spouses are not able to find gainful employment. So before we move out of this section, it's a lot of statistics that I've just thrown out there and put before you, but I would love to hear you share your answers in the chat pod. What is the number that really strikes you, or the statistic that strikes you the most as you heard them come across today? If you would just share it with us in the chat, and drop it in under select everyone, and just let us know what's the number, the discussion that we just went through, that really strikes you the most. And looks like people are thinking through what we talked about. So as you think of it, please feel free to drop it in the chat pod, and we would love to hear what it is that really strikes your ears the most. Because really, when I look at that, the critical takeaways that I have is, what do all these numbers add up to? They add up to impacts to individuals, to the spouses, to the service members, and to the children. To the children of these families, the service members who are trying to go to work and to serve and who are trying to focus on the mission when they're worried about putting food on the table, when their spouse can't find a job. Um, and then we also see that there are impacts to retention and readiness and recruitment. And, in general, what we see is that very few branches of the service are currently having no, or have more people than they want for recruiting purposes. Recruitment is something that the military is facing. Thank you for sharing. Great, some feedback that the numbers are reflective of the clients that this person works with. Thank you for that, Connie. 21% unemployment is what struck some people. The licensure element, that's a huge aspect of it. Absolutely. 34%, wonderful. 1 in 5 citing challenges with employment. Um, and then the 38% less, earning 38% less than peers. Thank you all for your feedback. It is really striking to hear the numbers, I think. So why do I give you these numbers? Because I know many of you have seen them. They come in reports. A couple of things. One of them, it's so helpful to review it. The second thing is, please feel free to share this with the military spouses with whom you work. Because one of the things that I encounter and see is military spouses tell me they think they're doing it wrong. They can't find a job because they're doing it wrong. They're struggling to keep their career moving forward because they think they're doing it wrong. And I think it's so helpful to know that they're amongst others who understand and who are experiencing the same thing. So please take these when somebody says, I just can't figure it out, this is my fault, to remind them it is not. We're going to give you some tools, and also you are in good company on this, unfortunately. So, okay, so as we move forward, let's talk a little bit about what the HR function looks like a little bit behind the scenes. So, one of the things that I wanted to flag for y'all to pass along to the spouses that you speak with is that many of the HR people that these spouses are encountering that are reviewing resumes are not aware of or trained on military spouse issues. And it's not because they don't care. I can tell you for myself, I worked in HR for 12 years before I was married to an active duty service member. I was involved in the HR professional development, and I designed conferences, I held conferences, I attended many of them. And I did not hear discussion about military spouse employment. The first time it hit my radar was sitting at a book club of military spouses in Alexandria, Virginia in 2017. And it was when I realized, wait, I have not heard people talking about this. Um, and it was something not because people don't care. I lived in a town with a very large military installation that was a significant portion of the local economy, but I had not heard this topic addressed. And I am sure I had encountered the resumes for and interacted with many military spouses given just the prevalence of the installation there. So it was something that then I set out on a mission to understand and talk about this issue more. So what is it that HR is seeing when they see a resume or when somebody comes across their desk? So at a fundamental level, when HR is taught to review resumes in general, we are taught the following flags. And these are the things we're looking at because you're trying to understand a person based on a piece of paper or a couple of pieces of paper. So one of the things that is a flag are gaps in employment. And there's two types of gaps, and both of them are flags for generally for different reasons. The first one is leaving one job before having the next. So somebody resigns, you see a 3-month gap in employment, then you see a new job, or you see a 5-month gap in employment, and then you see a new job. Oftentimes that will flag for HR that potentially the person has been let go or terminated for poor performance. What we know with military spouses is often that means they were moving from one duty station to another, or they had a deployment or some sort of family crisis occur in the middle that had nothing to do with them not being a good employee, but because that was what their family or they personally needed. We also are taught to flag long-term gaps in employment, so multi-year gaps, either because, and this is not, it's but what we're kind of taught is, hey, is this person hiding something? Is there a job they don't want to tell you about because they got fired, because there was a problem? Is there a job they're not disclosing? Or if they haven't worked, have their skills atrophied during that time? So gaps in employment are a flag. The second thing that we're taught to look at is inconsistent career progression. So the person was going gangbusters. They were an accountant. They were an accountant too. They were a senior accountant. And then suddenly they're a bank teller. What happened there? Why did they not continue to upwardly progress? Um, what HR may be looking at is, okay, something happened, something went wrong, they weren't performing well, they struggled and needed to take a step back, something's going on. What we know for many military spouses is it may mean they were transitioned, the family was PCS to a more rural area where a higher level position simply wasn't available, and that was the best job that was available in that geographic area, or the job that was open at the time that they moved. Frequent geographic relocation can be a flag because it can look like someone can't stay put. It can look like they can't make decisions in their life. When we know from a military spouse perspective, that means PCS seasons. That means that their spouse, their active duty spouse, was relocated. Um, Frequent job changes or short tenure. I think employers are finally kind of recognizing just the average turnover is pretty high. We don't see a lot of people stay with a job for 20 years anymore, but there's still that hope. And people are still looking for, well, why does this person leave their job every 3 to 4 years? If they're a military spouse, it may be because they're PCSing. And then obviously those folks that have no or very little job history. It is so hard to make a hiring decision based on little job history. And so that is also obviously a flag when you have somebody coming in with a very short resume, or not a lot of information in there. So what can a spouse do about this? I don't want this to be the be all end all. And I will say, I think there are tremendous strides in the field of human resources and in awareness in general being brought about by groups like OneOp and SECO and the Military Spouse Employment Partnership, which we'll talk about in a minute, to try to bridge that understanding gap to say, hey, understand that this is a different population and the flags aren't what you think they are. And I think we're coming a long way in HR. And we really want to help give you some tools as you're working with these active duty spouses, the military spouses, to give them tools to advocate for themselves as we continue to bridge this gap between employers that need employees. Because here's the thing, 4% unemployment historically is very low. So when you go to HR conferences, what you hear is we cannot find people. We cannot find people. We need employees. We need good employees. We can't find them. And then we come into the military spouse employment sphere and we hear so many people that need work. And so it is so clear that these are two groups that need a bridge built. And I think there are so many wonderful people building bridges. And so this is to try to help the spouses continue to build the bridge from their side, right? Like employers need to build the bridge, employees, military spouses need to build that bridge from their side of the river too. So how can we help? How can you as providers help spouses prepare? The first thing is be communicative. I think that military spouses sometimes it's hard to know that their resume does look non-traditional when they're entering the job force or when they're, entering a new market, when they're not known. So it's just a person it's just a name on the top of a piece of paper. So what I recommend is explaining in the cover letter, address the flags that we talked about on the last slide. What does that look like? It looks like saying something like, you'll note that I have had a 5-month gap since my last employment, since my last job. That gap is due to my spouse's service in the United States military during that time, and we were moving across the country. I was unable to work during that time, or if it's a career, a kind of a regression. I don't like using that word, but I don't know that there's a better word, but it's essentially if you have somebody who, for example, was, a senior accountant who went to being a bank teller, explaining during that time that was the only available work that would allow me to continue to develop my skill set. And then here's what I want you to encourage the spouses to do is to pivot from there to strengths. And during that time, I was able to really focus on developing my interpersonal skills, my customer service skills, which will make me even better as I return to the accounting side because of what I learned through those months, those years. I was unable to work during that time. However, it has prepared me to reenter with focus and with time to really engage in this job. This is where if we were if copyright didn't exist, I would have the Ross image from Friends of saying pivot. So this is where I want everybody to write pivot with an exclamation point on their notes. So explain it and then pivot it to where it is the strengths of organization, the strengths of communication, the strengths of meeting new people and creating new networks in new duty stations and areas. That is a unique skill set to the military spouse who comes in and makes new friends and finds new doctors and sets up new utilities and does all of the things, registers vehicles and does all of the logistical things that many people maybe will only do once or twice in their lives at most. Um, so explaining those things, explaining on the resume, it is okay to explain on the resume gaps in employment. You know, June 2022 to May 2024, spouse stationed at Ramstein Air Force Base, unable to work due to local licensure rules. I don't know if that's true in Ramstein, but I'm just using it as an example to hold space on the resume to say, I know there's a gap here and let me explain it to you. And where possible, fill in what are the things during that time that you did to continue to develop your skills. I earned my certification, I earned an additional certification in my area of specialization. I worked on learning a foreign language. I volunteered at an organization on base. Some of the things that can help fill in that time to show I have continued to develop and move forward, and I continue to be a great asset to your organization. It just doesn't look like every other resume you see. And additionally, during an interview, be prepared to advocate, to explain and answer. I see on here that you have a 2-year gap in your employment. Be able to explain the 2-year gap and then pivot to strengths and skills and aptitudes that are developed through your volunteer work, through your personal life as a military spouse, recognizing those skills, helping that person that you're talking to. I'm saying you're, but the person, the military spouse you're speaking with, helping them identify those strengths that truly they do possess and they may not even realize. Include volunteer and community work in there if it is something that, especially if it is related to the career field the person is engaged in. Spouses can be strategic. And I think that this is a really important way to help conserve energy because I think that people can get really just, it's easy not to take a strategic approach and just start just sending information, sending applications out instead of being strategic about their approach. The first one, my recommendation is to seek out volunteer and community work that stands out on a resume. So some ideas and your installation, your population that you work with, there may be specific ones that come to mind for you, but some things off the top of my head. Air Force Key Support Liaisons or the equivalent, the Navy Family Ombudsman, the Army Key Spouses, serving in a function like that. The organizations within the military needs those key support positions. And they can really be a great thing to have on a resume to show engagement, to show coordination, to show initiative. Target virtual or transferable, oh, I'm sorry, family support entities on base. Sometimes I know our local office has said that sometimes they will work with people who have like a marketing background to have them provide assistance with regard to marketing or coordinating events, organize a group, find some way to take that initiative with a family support entity. Where possible, find volunteer work that is consistent with the field the spouse wants to work in. So if they want to work, there was one spouse I had the pleasure of speaking with who had a degree in library sciences. And so she was her spouse was stationed in an area where she couldn't legally work. And so she then found a way to volunteer at the local library so that she could continue to have that work in her job related field. Look for things that demonstrate initiative, not just showing up and doing something, but actually showing initiative and taking on a project yourself. Two notes. Unless the spouse's employment goals are predominantly faith-based, know that employers may be a little bit reluctant with regard to volunteering associated with a church or a religious function. This is just by nature of the way that employment discrimination laws work. Employers may be a little bit hesitant around that. And then also beware of employment law violations. In particular, every once in a while, I will see some targeting by groups of military spouses to do unpaid work for civilian companies. So it is important to remind military spouses that they cannot volunteer for a for-profit business. Some other things is to target virtual or transferable jobs. So looking specifically for work that is virtual or that has a job where they might be able to find another position with the same organization at a new duty station. I suggest beginning with the Military Spouse Employment Partnership. This is a job. This is more than a job board. It is an entire organization of people and organizations who have come together to try to focus on providing employment for military spouses. And it is a fantastic organization that is part of SECO. And so if you're not familiar with it, please, I recommend encouraging this, distributing this to those the military spouses you work with. This bullet point I know is in the news a lot right now, but federal employment is something that historically has been a great place for military spouses. Additionally, look for military spouse friendly friendly employers, people that I encourage employers to put on their jobs page. We support military families and encourage the hiring of military spouses. Or I'm encouraging on the HR side, when people are doing an online application, to have a radio button that says, I'm a military spouse, please give my resume special consideration. Allowing employers to show up for military spouses and know that their resumes need special consideration is a great opportunity. But last but not least, don't also, military spouses shouldn't assume just because an organization doesn't say that they're actively recruiting military spouses, it doesn't mean they aren't. Don't be afraid of employers who don't have that notation or designation. They just might not have encountered this issue yet. Well-informed and passionate spouses can create meaningful change within a single organization just by taking that initiative to inform the employer about the issues. So let's crowdsource. If you know of a military spouse friendly employer that you have encountered, drop the organization in the chat pod. Please be sure to select everyone. This can be a great way to just crowdsource. Hey, we've had a lot of luck with military spouses finding remote work with X organization. So I'm going to go ahead and keep going for time's sake, but yet if you have any organizations that you have seen spouses have a great experience with, please drop them in the chat. So I see RSM has a dedicated mission to hiring military spouses for remote work. Wonderful, because really remote work is kind of the gold standard because it allows spouses to take that job with them to build vesting, to build seniority, all of those things. Colleges in town where there is a poster installation. Absolutely. Okay, so as we know from our numbers discussion, PCS is one of the areas where spouses statistically have a high likelihood of not a higher likelihood of falling into unemployment. So how can we help spouses kind of get themselves organized for PCS? Military spouses are so good at organizing household goods and all of, kids' schools and kids' doctors and all of those things. But how do we also help military spouses prepare to PCS strategically? So the first thing is to check, can the spouse stay with their current employer? Can their current job be made virtual? And even if it's not currently being done virtually, I encourage the employee to look at the handbook and read any remote or virtual work policies. And even if the policy says no, prepare a business case for why your work would be this military spouse's job could be made remote. So the employee's performance history, the nature of the work, and prepare to answer objections. Build a case to say, look, my last 3 performance evaluations have all been exemplary. This is how I believe my job can be done remotely. Here are some challenges, and here are my solutions to them. Let's see if we can make this work, because we see that spouses lose vesting in retirement plans because of how frequently job changes are happening. They lose seniority within organizations. So doing that is really helpful. And then what if, as service providers, it was also an area where we tried to help make connections as spouses prepared for their next duty station, helping them target employment before they leave their previous duty station? What if we connected them to the family support office at the new duty station to help get them connected with the local community, the local job networks there? Really looking at it as a strategic approach to also not just packing up their household goods with care, but packing up their career and their job with care to transition them to that next duty station. Um, be the best applicant. Spouses being the strongest applicant with the cleanest resume, the most efficient and clear and practical responses in interviews, that can go an incredibly long distance. So all things military one source. I highly recommend the SECO program. There are such incredible resources on there with regard to resume writing and career coaching and mock interviewing. And I will tell you, there is no replacement for mock interviewing, practicing interviewing over and over and over again. Um, it is something that even if you have an inexperienced interviewer, the service member, a good friend, just having them ask questions and practicing answering them is great. Practice answering the questions that we talked about that are flags. It is a really great way to just gain confidence in the interviewing sphere. Um, and then one thing that, and this comes out of my spouse being an aviator, is that flashcards are king. And so make interview flashcards that have the questions on them. And as the spouse is sitting at school pickup, practice your interview answers. Practice the hard ones in particular, the ones that they struggle with or that they find awkward. So that's a really great way to just set them up for success, is to approach it in a way that they are the most qualified, most strong applicant in that stack. So wonderful chat pod conversation. We're going to give you another one. So now, if you would, in the chat pod, what is your best practice for helping spouses prepare? What is your the thing you've seen get spouses the furthest? Is it mock interviewing, practicing resume writing? What is the skill that you've seen, the best tip that you have, your best practice? Please drop it in the chat pod. Okay, we'll give folks, and in the interest of time, networking, Tiffany, thank you. Somebody says networking. Networking truly is the the best way to get into employers very often. Help them understand how to market themselves. It sets the stage for the complete job search process. Absolutely. Helping military spouses identify their strengths goes a tremendous distance, helping them understand where their strength is. Mock interviewing. Thank you, Katie. Yes. I encourage all spouses to attend all post-based briefings. They have all of the resources. Go to the briefings. It is incredible how many resources are available on installations that I think are overlooked, and people just don't know they're there. Okay, in the interest of time, we'll keep going. I always have more to say than time available. Knowledge is power. So some things that I think military spouses can empower themselves on in terms of knowledge. The first one is that military spouse is a protected status in only one state, and that state is Virginia. A protected class just means that employment decisions may not be made on this basis. Think hiring, firing, promotion. So in Virginia, it is illegal to make a firing decision based on somebody being a military spouse. In some states, there may be a more tenuous protection around that. There may be protections for things like spousal affiliation or marital status that might be able to cover it. But the short answer is that in many states, it may be technically legal for an employer to say, I see that you're a spouse, that your spouse is in the military. I know you're just going to leave. So we're going to choose someone else for this job. We're not going to give you that promotion that you've earned. And that can be really, really soul crushing for spouses who go through that. Um, but what is legal and what is good business decisions is not the same. So the best way to really combat this, yes, know that there are protections in some states, but also know that the best way to combat this is to educate the lack of information that causes employers to make these decisions, to say, I'm not hiring this person because they're a military spouse. And oftentimes it comes out of lack of understanding about military spouses, about judgments that are not based in fact. Um, so I really encourage, and we'll talk about some statistics on this in the next slide that I think are really eye-opening and helpful. So the most common objection we hear to hiring or promoting military spouses is they're just going to leave. But I want to challenge that from a statistical perspective. So when we look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, nationwide median tenure for individuals aged 20 to 24 is 1.4 years, meaning that in general, people aged 20 to 24 will stay at a job for 1.4 years. The median tenure for ages 25 to 34 is only 2.7 years. So when we look at the prime age of most military spouses, age 20 to 34, the likelihood of them staying beyond 20 to 20, about 2 years, 3 years, is low statistically, regardless of whether they're a military spouse or not. So PCS frequency is generally 2 to 4 years, which means that if a spouse gets a job when they arrive at a duty station and stay until they PCS, they will be at or above the average tenure for that job, which means that when an employer is looking at a stack of resumes, the military spouse is no less statistically likely to leave, more statistically likely to leave than any other person in that stack. And so this is where I think it is so helpful if we can continue to educate employers, and spouses can be the ones to do it, to say, I statistically am no more likely to leave than anyone else. And in general, what we see is actually military spouses may be, more likely to stay when they find a great employer who supports military service and understands the spouse issues. Okay. Another issue that I cannot help but bring up is the Family and Medical Leave Act. I'm not going to go through this a ton, but I want to make sure that you all are aware and can put on military spouses' radar the existence of the Family Medical Leave Act provisions regarding military families. And there's two types of leave. It's called qualifying exigency and military caregiver leave. Not all employers are covered by the FMLA, many are. What I see is that quite often employers aren't well versed in the area of military family leave. So just a military spouse knowing the existence of this can go a long way in them advocating for leave surrounding a deployment as opposed to just resigning their job. Additionally, be aware that paid job protected leave may be available in some states. FMLA is unpaid job protected leave, meaning they can take the leave, but it's not paid. Some states, Washington, where I am sitting, does also have wage replacement for some leave surrounding military spouse and military families. So just know that that's on the radar. Navigating licensure, I just wanted to touch briefly on a couple of things. The first one is helping to guide spouses and encourage them to look for local rules in the new jurisdiction. We are seeing so much activity across all different areas of specialization, where organizations and groups are advocating successfully to get special admission military spouse licensure rules in different areas, different states. For example, it is so interesting when I go to an HR conference, all I hear is that healthcare cannot find nurses. And at least in my sphere, I see so many military spouses who are nurses who cannot find work. And it is so interesting to sit in these two different rooms, knowing that these are two groups looking for the same thing. Nurses are in short supply, and we have many military spouses who are nurses and other military and other medical providers and medical staff. And so helping look for local rules that will ease admission in that area. Look for advocacy groups in their specific area of expertise or licensure. Go join the local Society for Human Resource Management if they work in HR, but look for the advocacy groups that specifically work on licensure. So, for example, in my sphere, there's the Military Spouse JD Network, which is a group of military spouses who are attorneys and who advocate actively and have made great strides in creating local military spouse admission rules. So help spouses look for those. And last but not least, do not forget that the DoD reimburses up to $1,000 of qualifying relicensure costs for qualifying PCS moves. So that is an incredibly great resource, and it helps offset the cost for families. Some parting thoughts. Your work in this area matters deeply to the individuals and families who are involved. You can truly change lives by helping empower people in this area. Please share what you know with the others in your installation, in your office, to help continue to spread the word. And for those on installations, I'm going to put in my own personal plug to consider reaching out to lead spouses or lead support liaisons like the Air Force Key Support Liaisons, the Navy Family Ombudsmans, the Ombudsman, the Army Key Spouses. They may be some of the first people to know about spouse employment challenges or PCS moves, where these resources can really be given at a phase of intervention that can be really helpful. So I know we were going to ask people to share their key takeaway, but what I would love is to, and we have somebody here saying, shout from the rooftops, encourage spouses to self-disclose that they are a military spouse and lean on the military spouse employment partnership before their service member leaves the military. So there's some great resources. SECO is incredible. And many of the other organizations, but really SECO is the place to start, I think. So we were going to jump in and ask for feedback, but I think what we're going to do in the interest of time is open it up to questions. So please take a moment, think through what we've talked about. What questions can I answer? What can I provide clarity on? While you're thinking up your questions, I'm just going to touch on this spouse employment resources page. As I said, SECO, which is the Spouse Education and Career Opportunities entity, their website is just a great place to start. The Military Spouse Employment Partnership, really incredible. That's within SECO. Federal employment, the licensure reimbursement is really, we have a link here to learn more from Military OneSource about licensure reimbursement. On a personal note on that one, I will say, please encourage those service members to continue to, I see one hand raised, and unfortunately we aren't going to be able to take verbal questions, but please do type your question into the chat and send it to everyone. And then we will be happy to answer it. On the licensure, just know that your local accounting office may need a little bit of help and encouragement to figure out how to process the reimbursement. We went through this, and I just encourage you to be patient, be helpful, encourage spouses to be patient and helpful, help the local office learn how to process it if they don't. Okay, a question. How can we advocate for the state unemployment insurance offices to highlight UI benefits for military spouses tied to PCSs or a fact sheet? It is very difficult to connect the dots per state for our spouses. The unemployment process is difficult, and it is difficult, I think, because it varies. It is a state program, and so it varies from one state to another. I think that the best way is that most every state has a job liaison. They have different names in every state, but where they are a workforce development group that essentially is trying to help make sure that people can access the resources and the jobs and everything within that area. What I would say is that probably reaching out to that local entity in your area to say, hey, can we work with the UI system to make sure that we are including discussions of, highlighting FAQs maybe for military spouses. And this might be something where if you are at a local installation that you could reach out to the workforce development section in your local state government and say, can we work together to create a fact sheet? And this is something that I don't know how much internal dialogue there is between different installations across state lines, but I think it would be really great if we could help connect spouses to their next duty station. I don't believe that we can most likely create any sort of if it was comprehensive, it would need to have all the states because it is a state, because UI is a state benefit. So there won't ever, unfortunately, be one fact sheet that all the answers are universal, but perhaps we could get better coordination with the state and then also have some sharing as people transition to a new duty station. It's a great question. Any other questions before we go, before I turn it back over? And on that note, I will turn it back over to Kim to close us out and give us all of the information about certification. Thank you all for your time and attention today.
Thank you for this amazing presentation today, Alice. It was full of valuable resources. And thank you, the audience, for taking time out of your busy day to join us. Your level of chat engagement in this session has been so heartwarming. So, again, thank you. I'll be sharing the continuing education details here shortly, but first, I want to highlight 2 on demand webinars focused on military spouse employment. These webinars provide valuable insights and a variety of support services, resources, community networks, and programs to help military spouses achieve their career aspirations. You'll find both event page URLs on this slide, and they're also linked in the chat pod. As always, we encourage you to check out our comprehensive collection of on demand OneOp webinars and take advantage of those free CE opportunities. Please mark your calendar as we invite you to attend our next webinar coming up on Thursday, May 29th at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, entitled Securing Capital and Mentorship as a Military Spouse Entrepreneur. In this webinar, participants will discover ways to help military spouses navigate the unique challenges of military life while building thriving businesses. They will explore military-specific funding opportunities, strategies for maintaining business continuity during relocations, and supportive mentorship communities. Additionally, attendees will gain valuable insights into the military spouse entrepreneur landscape and leave with practical resources they can apply immediately. You can register now on the OneOp webinar event page as well as through the link shared in the chat pod. We value your feedback on your experience participating in today's webinar. It is very important to us, so we ask our audience to take a short evaluation, letting us know your thoughts on today's discussion. We would greatly appreciate your response. Your feedback will help us to continue to improve your professional development experience. The link to this evaluation, as well as continuing education opportunities, is available on the event page. When you visit the page, you will see the purple button similar to the one you see pictured here on the slide. Click that, and it will take you to the evaluation as well as the post-link test to receive your CE credits. If you do not see this button, perhaps due to having the page open for an extended period, please refresh or exit out and reload the page. To access continuing education opportunities or a certificate of attendance, you can follow the direct link to the evaluation, which has just been shared to the chat pod. If you prefer to access this later, please navigate to the webinar event page for today's session and follow the purple Continuing Education button. Today's webinar offers 1 continuing education credit along with a certificate of attendance for general use. For those wanting to receive continuing education credits, here are the available opportunities. The American Association for Family and Consumer Sciences, the Commission for Case Manager Certification, the National Council on Family Relations, the Society for Human Resource Management, the University of Texas at Austin, Steve Hicks School of Social Work for licensed professional counselors, licensed marriage and family therapists, as well as a OneOp certificate of attendance. Select CE types require the completion of a post test. A completion certificate will be automatically emailed to you within 24 to 48 hours to the email address you provide. Please note that some email providers will direct certificates to your spam folder, so please be sure to check there as well. For questions regarding continuing education, please email ce@oneop.org. And let's stay connected. We invite you to subscribe to our mailing list and follow OneOp on social media. Please be sure to sign up and follow along for all of OneOp's programming. Be sure to visit us at our website, oneop.org, to explore upcoming events, articles, resources, and more. You can also find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. We will stick around for a few more minutes for those who wish to grab any links or information that was shared in the chat. As a reminder, a YouTube recording of today's webinar will be available for viewing on the event page within 48 hours. We thank you all again for attending and hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.